I think I've done this video before. In case you guys are wondering, we lost all of the footage. We recorded this entire thing through. We're very excited to get a video out, and we lost all of the footage on the SD card, which hasn't happened to me in a very long time.
It was fitting for how the rest of the build has been going, so
Exactly.
no surprises there.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about everything regarding our pop-up, comparing a pop-up versus a high roof camper, why we decided to go with a pop-up, kind of the pros and cons of each, go into all the different design considerations for a pop-up camper, things like hard-sided versus canvas, different lift mechanisms. I also want to talk about making versus buying a pop-up camper. One of our big considerations was like, can we actually build this ourselves? And yeah, that's about it. So let's just get into it. So I think the most apparent difference between a pop-up and a high roof camper is obviously the height of the overall vehicle, the height of the body. This was kind of one of our main considerations. If we wanted the van to be tall enough for me to stand in, the overall height would have been really tall. And it's actually, one of the reasons why we ruled out a lot of vans like a Sprinter or ProMaster right from the beginning was that I wouldn't have even been able to stand up in them. With a pop-up camper, you can really control like how high the roof is. We ended up doing something a little bit different than most pop-up campers. Ours is actually a little bit taller with the roof down. The reason behind this is we wanted the entire interior to be very comfortable, like sit up straight at the bench and get work done on a laptop for me. The overall height of our vehicle is a lot taller than most pop-ups just because it's intended to be fully usable with the roof down.
Not while standing.
Yeah, obviously you can't stand, but it's, well, I guess you can stand.
I can stand.
I want to say the total height is probably about 5'6". It gets a lot shorter because the bed, gets in the way of most of the sections with the roof down. But it was kind of one of our main design goals was like, while it wouldn't be perfect when the top is down, we still wanted it to be very comfortable and you can still sleep, you can still get stuff done, still make food if you need to, and still access everything and use your camper mostly as normal. The cool thing about that though is you're essentially drastically increasing your interior volume of the van with a pop-up, because I don't think there's a single van out there that has a single hard-sided van that has a 9-foot interior. Having the pop-up essentially is kind of acting like an RV slide where we're just extending the interior volume. I'll throw up some numbers, but it's actually one of the things that I did a very long time ago was I ran a calculation of the interior volume of like a Sprinter van of the same length versus the interior volume of our pop-up when the roof is up. The pop-up combined with the hard-sided walls really makes it a lot taller inside, or a lot more roomy inside. Another big one is lowering the center of the gravity of the van. If you imagine like if your van was, a foot or 2 feet taller to be a high roof, you have all that extra weight of your roof at the top of the van. It's kind of crazy how heavy the roof ends up being by the time you even just having a flat panel is really heavy, but by the time you add solar, fans, Starlink, wiring, all this stuff on top of your roof, it gets really heavy. So kind of lowering that center of gravity makes a huge difference. What I will say is depending on the design of pop-up you do, it's not lowering the center of gravity that much. A lot of pop-up designs add a lot of weight at the ceiling, particularly like the Scissor Lift design, which we'll go over later. It adds a ton of bars and stuff at the very top of the van, which, is probably not quite as bad because it is still lower, but it's a bunch of weight that a high roof wouldn't have. So you definitely can lower the center of gravity, but I wouldn't say all pop-ups achieve that. One of the main benefits I hear people talk about of a hard-sided camper versus a pop-up is it being more insulated and better for the winter. I've read a lot on forums. That's kind of like one of the main things people will say about why to go for a hard-sided camper versus a pop-up. I don't think it's entirely true, and I actually think a pop-up camper can be better for the winter and more insulated and better in the cold. I think this is a common misconception that kind of stems from your classic Westfalia style van. If you imagine those old Westfalia vans, they have a super thin single layer of canvas with no insulation. So obviously it's going to be really bad in the winter. You can kind of choose how insulated your pop-up is. We kind of ended up going with something medium level of insulation. The main reason why is we had this whole other plan for our pop-up where the canvas, we wouldn't have had room for it. But after changing our design, we now have room for a way thicker canvas. But anyways, the point is you can really choose how thick your canvas is. For example, the main wall insulation people usually use is Thinsulate. I want to say it's 1.5 inches thick after it expands. There's really no reason if you wanted to, you couldn't just use that as your canvas insulation. You have a layer of canvas, the insulation, and then another layer of canvas to protect it. It wouldn't be quite as insulated as the walls of our camper, but it'd be pretty close. But the part where it's actually better for the winter, we were in wintertime in Banff, and normal wintertime, depending on elevation, is kind of hovering around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And while we were there, it was like during a cold spell. I want to say it got as low as -40, not including wind chill at night. But it's not kind of like your normal weather. It's kind of like an unlucky spell. And if we were in this camper and that happened, we would just not use the pop-up. When the roof is down, if you imagine you have all of that canvas material that's all around you, that's adding a ton of extra insulation. And then on top of that, the interior volume of your camper is way smaller. It's a lot less of an area to heat, and it's just going to be way more efficient. So if we're ever in like really cold weather, we're just not going to pop it up, and it kind of gives us a lot of options there. And then on top of that, when the roof is down, if you imagine, not only do we have all that canvas around, we have a giant 6-inch foam mattress, which probably has an extremely high R value on top of our roof. So it's a ton of extra insulation there, and that combined with a small air volume makes it better for the winter, or better for extreme cold. Now, if you're only using it in cold environments, and that's like the only thing, obviously you wouldn't want to have to deal with having to, have it down, pop it up, whatever. I think for the way we travel and the kind of the cold weather we see, it'll end up working really well for us. And at the end of the day, we're coming from a rooftop tent, which we love and was comfortable in a lot of ways, but this is really going to be no comparison in comfort. So I think we're going to be happy no matter what. Another big one is wind. I think the previous points I mentioned about being able to raise or lower it is also a big factor. It's not like you're going to be in an area where it's 80-mile-an-hour winds every single day. It's pretty uncommon. Most of the time, it's like you just get caught in a windy day or two. So if that happens, we can always lower the top if we want to. But the only problem with wind really is noise. If you build a good camper, it's not like it's going to fall apart. Depending on how you install your canvas, you can actually make your canvas really taut, in which case it's really not going to be making that much noise. Hopefully. That's kind of one of the things we'll have to test, but I'm really not that worried about wind. We have a lot of different options. We can really see how it ends up working for us.
Again, we can always collapse it.
Yeah. A clear benefit for the pop-up, though, the driving winds are not blowing you around as much with a pop-up camper because the side profile and the front profile of the van are a lot smaller. So with windy driving, which is something we actually do run into a lot, you're not going to be as affected by the wind. With that said, it still is like a really big camper, so I'm sure, the wind is not going to be great. It's just a massive flat wall at the end of the day. We've driven it a decent amount so far, and I think we hit a little bit of wind, and I was kind of surprised it really wasn't that bad. Having a pretty stiff suspension and wide wheelbase, things really weren't shaking around that much. I felt like we had pretty good stability.
And our low center of gravity. I feel like when you see a high roof Sprinter going around, it just looks like the entire thing is heavy.
Yeah. They're super narrow and our camper has a ridiculous amount of weight really low, which I think visually it can definitely look kind of top heavy, but the way the E350s are, the frames are actually widened a bit, and it basically all the engine, the transmission, all of that is dropped lower than on a truck. So even though it looks very tall, all of that insanely heavy stuff is just really low. And I think one of the coolest things is I want to say the van was 5,000 pounds when we got it. And by the time we're done with it, fully loaded, we should be around 9,000. But 5,000 pounds and the vehicle was only 2 feet tall other than a little bit of body. There really is just a crap ton of weight that's really low. Wow, that's a tangent. So another big factor is setup time. With a high roof camper, there's no setup. You just go into your camper and it's done. I think setup time is one of those things that you definitely have to be aware of, what are your chores. In any vehicle, there's going to be certain things that are part of your daily chores. The way we have it set up, you just flip a switch and the top goes up. You flip a switch and the top goes down. You just kind of have to make sure everything's clear, there's nothing in the way, and then you're good to go. It takes about 30 seconds. Really not that big of a deal to flip a switch and wait 30 seconds before you can fully stand. And then same with the way down. So I'm really not too worried about it. On our rooftop tent, it was kind of annoying because you had to you had to get out of it. You had to make sure everything you had was out of it. You had to stuff all the fabric in, go around and force it down, and just it
takes two people.
Yeah, it kind of takes two people to do efficiently. You need to latch it all around. So there definitely can be worse of a setup time, but if you're going to be comparing at a high level pop-ups versus high roof hard-sided campers, I don't think it's fair to assume the worst case design. We're really comparing the optimal design of each here, which I think is only fair when we're trying to make a comparison video. With a high roof van, you're very likely to have the roof right above your head. I guess you technically could make it taller if you wanted to, but that would just be a little crazy to, make a crazy tall van for no reason. If you're in a house, for example, a house with high ceilings makes a huge difference in comfort and how big of the van feels. And
how big the house
how big the house feels, or van. If you house is a van, they're the same thing to us. If we were going to do a hard-sided van, it would have been just tall enough for me to stand in, and I'd like hate the feeling of having a roof like right above your head. I really think it makes the inside feel a lot more claustrophobic. So with our design, we have essentially two different stories. We have kind of the lower level where you can like sit and stand in parts of it, and then above that we have the entire bed. So we end up getting a lot more real estate, and we can kind of fit a lot more stuff just because we have a two-story design. That's a benefit of a pop-up is like we said earlier, you can have a lot larger of an interior volume in a smaller profile while driving. The other thing I'll mention is like thermal transfer and condensation. This could be a video entirely in itself talking about this, but there definitely is a downside. Our canvas is going to be breathable, so it's not going to act as a vapor barrier, which means it does have a potential to have condensation form on the inside. It's definitely like a common issue with pop-ups, but I think having the extra insulation and running the diesel heater, which is extremely overpowered for the size, we should be able to deal with that. Dealing with condensation definitely can be a benefit of a hard-sided high roof camper. So now that you're sold and you're buying a pop-up camper, let's talk about the different designs for a pop-up. In terms of like the two main designs for a pop-up, you can kind of do a vertical lift that lifts straight up versus a wedge. Really, the only benefit of a wedge, in my opinion, is that it's lighter weight and it's a lot simpler. The coolest wedge design that I've seen is like Wabi Sabi Overland and his Jeep camper. They had like extreme weight constraints to stay under the gross vehicle weight. He did a great job, but like to give you an example, I think he said his canvas is like 5 pounds. I want to say our canvas was 35 pounds when I weighed it. So that kind of just gives you an example of like, they're very different vehicles. They're totally, different designs. So I think a wedge can make a lot of sense for his camper. But for us, being able to stand in the entire vehicle was kind of a must. We didn't want to like limit standing to one section. We kind of wanted to be able to raise the bed and just fully open up the space and really just get to use all of the interior space we have. For a pop-up, you can kind of choose to do a hard-sided versus a canvas. There's a lot of different ways you can do a hard-sided camper. Like you could do like the old Alaskan style that kind of pops straight up. I think that one's kind of one of the coolest designs. We didn't do that because there's a lot of complications with the seal there and longevity, but also with the way like our box is one piece with the cab, it would have been very hard to like make a front wall, or like the front wall would have had to be folding or something. You can do like an entirely folding design for a pop-up. I think there's a couple that do that. I think the main ones is like Oru Designs or Hiatus Campers. It's really cool. It's kind of like an origami of like hard-sided walls that kind of fold up. There's a few reasons why we didn't do this. I still think it's a great option for a lot of people, but it's a little silly, but we like the feeling of being in a canvas tent. It kind of reminds us of like the rooftop tent, which reminds us of actually sleeping in a tent, which I get isn't for everyone. We really like feeling like we're outside when we're actually camping. We're living outside. Like the inside space is really just a way to get away from the weather. And it's really our first time ever having an indoor space like this. So we really want to make sure we're spending most of our time outside. I think being able to sleep with all the canvas open, just getting a huge breeze, it really is just a lovely feeling and really, brings us back to tent camping, which is kind of where we all started.
360 windows, baby.
Yeah, and we have 360 windows all the way around, which is like not something you can practically do in a hard-sided or even a folding hard-sided. It's with the way they fold, it's really hard to actually get windows that are that big. I haven't been in a ton of hard-sided, but the ones I've seen seem very claustrophobic inside. This isn't entirely true, but like I think they can kind of look a little bit like an insane asylum. And I think when you have like these like hard-sided white walls that are kind of like right next to you and they kind of like narrow a little bit, I think it just definitely gives a smaller feel versus the canvas and all the windows. Yeah, I still think a hard-sided is good. And if we were to design another one, I definitely would have seriously considered doing that.
Third design.
Yeah, third design. There was so many things to figure out with it. And it was just kind of one of those things that like, let's just stick with the canvas and roll with it. Along those lines, making versus buying was kind of a big decision. Before we started this, I'd say there's two main scary parts of the design. The first one was the kinetic subframe and isolating the body from the frame of the vehicle. And then I think the other scary part for me was like, how do we actually make the pop-up work and seal well and like function well? We initially were going to work with the company Colorado Camper Vans out of Colorado. They quoted us at $30,000 to do the pop-up, which even in the scope of this vehicle, which is like not cheap, I could not get myself to spend $30,000 on a pop-up. We saw some of their pop-ups in person and I was immediately like amazed by their canvas quality. It's a really good sewing job. The windows, everything is really, really good. The rest of their work definitely left a lot to be desired. The welds were just like really poor quality. There's kind of a lot of corners they cut, just some poor craftsmanship. And I think for the fact that it's kind of like their main business line, I'd really expect them to have a better design and not be cutting these corners. We kind of came up with a lot of ways to better the design and we eventually decided on making our own. We did though go with their canvas. So we were able to work out a deal where they were willing to just build the canvas for us for a good price. We got the canvas and I was amazed with the quality. Everything was so perfect. And it's one of those things where like, I definitely want to learn how to sew at one point. I definitely want to be able to do projects like that. But we had so many other things to do and it was nice to just not worry about it. Know you're getting a good product. We actually ordered that like...
I was literally just thinking that it's been a year and a half
since we got it. Yeah, we ordered it so long ago. I don't know why we thought we needed it.
We've moved from California to Washington with this fat roll of
canvas and a bunch of metal. And yeah, I don't know why we did that. That was crazy.
Well, we have it, at least.
There's certain things we bought so early in the build. Like we bought this for the shower. There's this little like teak slat that goes in our shower. And I don't know why, but like I thought I needed it when I was designing the initial subframe design, which was like the first thing we did the first month.
I mean, and it helped, but
it's just another thing that's like,
my camera roll one.
And I mean, maybe that's a good tip to mention, like, don't buy something for the build until you absolutely need it, because the chances are, if you're anything like us, you're just going to damage it, like storing it. I mean, the amount of stuff we've damaged just by like storing it in the side of the garage and like running into it or not having room, getting fiberglass dust all over it. It's bad. Okay, you know what I need that'll make this video better? A snack. You want one?
Yeah. Ow! Those are maybe a little big to be throwing at my face.
Anyways, to summarize, we ended up making our own. It went pretty poorly, but I think we're still happy we made it and saved ourselves the $25,000 that it would have costed. Now that we've kind of talked about these different considerations and you're completely sold on making your own, I kind of want to go over the different mechanisms you can use to lift the roof and kind of the pros and cons of each. First of which is the scissor mechanism, which is kind of similar to what Colorado Camper Van does. You basically have two bars, a linear actuator that runs horizontally that pushes on the bars and raises the top. There's definitely some benefits to this design. The main thing is that it keeps all of the hardware on the inside of the body. The downside of that is you're adding a ton of weight up high. You have all this extra metal, which ends up being, I mean, like a couple 100 pounds up there. So you're adding a ton of weight kind of for no reason at the top of the van, which I don't like. The other thing, and the reason we actually moved against this mechanism was because you have really bad leverage. Because the linear actuator is running completely horizontal, when the bars are like just starting to lift, it has really bad leverage on them and it has to work really hard. And then eventually, you know, it starts to get more and more upright and then it has no trouble. But their design relies on two actuators that are rated 1,000 pounds each. Even with that, it can barely lift anything other than the roof. If you can't tell, I'm a little salty to the scissor mechanism because we fully built a scissor mechanism. We did a really cool version of CCV's design, Colorado Camper Vans, where all of the weak points that we saw in their design, we improved on. So things like all the brackets were TIG welded, everything was laser cut, the fitment was really good. For some of their pivots, all they do is they just drill some holes and then like hope the metal, you know, I want to grab the piece. For example, we had these, I made these TIG welded brackets, and this is where the bushing, you know, where a bolt had to turn. So we did these press fit bushings in here that rely on shoulder bolts, and it was a really good design. The tolerances were really good. Everything just turned out really good with all the parts that we did. I also kind of was able to make it stronger and lighter weight and shave a ton of weight from the roof. It was going really well. The problem was once we actually ended up testing it, it didn't have enough leverage to lift the roof. That's not entirely true. Like it did just barely lift the roof, but we really wanted, you know, a massive margin of error. We wanted to be able to lift it with, you know, a ton of extra weight on the top. You really don't want to be running motors at their maximum capacity and, you know, have all your hardware crazy loaded like that, which is crazy to think that like the roof at that time when we were testing probably only weighed about 200 pounds or probably even less, like 150 pounds, and 2,000 pounds worth of actuators were struggling to lift that because of how bad of leverage it was. The way you can get around that is if you imagine like the roof section, if you make your roof section like taller, like for example, they have their high top pop-up campers. Those essentially have a lot larger of a vertical height, so that the bars are already at much better leverage starting out, so they have no issues lifting up. The other downside of this design is there's nothing that actually kind of locks the top up. There was kind of the two corners where like the actuators were, but the other corners just had these like little bendy pivot things, so you could kind of go in the corner and just like pull it down and it would just be able to like kind of bounce up and down. It just didn't have like the most robust feeling of kind of like locking up. The wind resistance is pretty good. We didn't ever end up testing ours, but there's quite a few videos of the owner of Colorado camper vans like grabbing the sidebars and shaking it. So I definitely think it can be pretty robust and good in the wind. Overall, we ended up doing the entire design and scrapping it. So if you want our parts for that, reach out. We will sell them to you at the cost of the metal.
Plus labor at $500.
Plus labor at $500 an hour, and it'll be a little cheaper than Colorado camper vans. I definitely want to publish the design because I think there was a lot of really cool details in there. I mean, if they wanted to do it, they could do it. It was pretty cool.
It was cool.
Yeah.
Didn't work, but...
Well, I feel like they could take that design that we did, really improve the quality of their tops. But the next one, and maybe the most common design, is like the bifold mechanism. Essentially how this works is you have 4 gas struts that kind of point like that, and then you have this like bifold hinge that locks out. I think the bifold mechanism is really cool because it can be really lightweight, it can be really strong in the wind, and it's just overall a really robust system. The reason why we didn't go with it is because once you start to get a larger camper like this, your roof panel starts to get pretty heavy, and it could be a little bit harder to have like a manually liftable top like that. You could add like a motor to it, but it wouldn't be that easy. But I really do think it's a good design, and probably for a lot of people it makes the most sense. A lot of people, though, I will say, put their gas struts on the outside of the camper all the time, which isn't the worst thing, but I think it's not great to have those exposed to the elements all the time. They definitely will eventually fail, and I think you're kind of speeding that up a lot by having them outside all the time. I'm not going to go into a wedge, but the wedge design is really simple. You just have a hinge right in the front. It kind of just hinges up like that, and then you have latches on the back. I think the main benefit of the wedge at the end of the day, like we mentioned earlier, is the simplicity. All right, well, the last and final design I want to go over is the 4-post linear actuator design, which is our favorite, and it's the one we actually ended up doing and works really well. Essentially how this works is you have 4 linear actuators in each of the corners. They don't actually have to be in the corners. Like there's some other designs I've seen where they're like in the center, like in the back. You basically just rely on linear actuators that are mounted vertically. And the benefit of this is, you know, they're pushing directly up in the direction they want to be. You can get actuators that are really strong and they just have absolutely no issues lifting the roof. Depending on the gearing of the ones you choose, they can do it really, really fast. The downside is, you know, these actuators, they're really strong in this direction, but they have absolutely no strength side to side. You kind of have to provide some sort of guidance system. So what we did is we use gas struts kind of similar to the bifold mechanism, but we end up having 8 of them. So we have 1, 2 like that, and then 2 going sideways. What ends up happening is you have struts that are pushing in every single direction, which means if the top tries to move in any direction, there's a opposing gas strut that's trying to push it the other way. So this ends up giving the top a ton of stability when it's up. The other benefit, I think this is the easiest design to get the maximum lift height. When you have a bifold or you have a scissor, you kind of have all these weird mechanisms that end up taking up a lot of space and kind of limit how high you can lift. Ours, I want to say we have about 36 inches of lift height. Yeah, we could have gone even more if we wanted to. It would have looked pretty ridiculous, but you can really get a ton of height out of the 4-post linear actuator design. The reason I think a lot of pop-ups, at least on normal van bodies, don't do this is because if you imagine like your normal van body curving in, there wouldn't really be a good way to like have the struts or the actuators facing upwards because you'd have to work against the curve. I don't think it's a great option for like a normal body van, but if you're doing something straight walled, it definitely is great. And again, the other downside is you do then have to have room for the actuators on the inside of the build, which I think if you plan around it is not a big deal at all. Our entire design though was based on not having those there, so adding them in ended up being kind of a pain. I think it worked out really well and I'm really happy with what we ended up with, and it really doesn't matter now that it's done. It definitely is something to consider that you have to have room and be able to service those if you need to. Well, yeah, I think that's about everything for this video. We apologize for not posting more. We've kind of just been really busy with the build and trying to balance building and actually filming, and sadly I think, you know, building is always going to come first because we actually want to travel and get out of here and be done building. But we've done a ton of really cool things on the inside that we're super excited to show you. We have literally dozens of videos that I think are going to be really interesting, kind of talking about a lot of design considerations I don't see people mentioning. I think we have a lot of good content coming. So if you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you are subscribed, I'm sorry, but we will have hopefully a lot more videos coming out. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. Please leave a comment down below if you have a pop-up and you like it, if you have a hard-sided camper and you like it. If you have any comments about designs or any questions, definitely leave a comment down below. We'd love to, engage with you guys and kind of talk about all the different pros and cons of each. If you made it this far and you're, putting up with us, you're still watching, still subscribed, thank you. We appreciate you. And we'll see you in the next video.